Somewhere on the winding road of spiritual awakening, after a cataclysmic revelation or the soft shattering of who you thought you were, the earth beneath you quakes. The familiar turns strange. The known becomes a shadow. You pierce the veil of illusion, glimpse the gears of your habits, the clamor of the world's demands, and then silence. At first, this quiet feels holy, a release, like stepping from a smoke-filled room into a dawn of pure air. But then, subtly, meaning slips away, not in a storm, but in a whisper, as if your soul dims the world's glow and forgets to reignite it. You cease striving, not from anguish, but from a sacred weariness, a hollowing that carries an eerie peace, a stillness that unsettles. A question stirs, faint yet piercing. Why, now that I see truth, do I feel so adrift? This is the unspoken paradox of awakening, the one no guide prepares you for. We're told enlightenment will set our purpose ablaze, that clarity will make us radiant with direction. Yet for many, the sensitive, the seekers, the soul wanderers, it does the opposite. It empties the heart's vessel, scraping away false drives until even desire feels like a stranger. You mistake this void for apathy, but it's something deeper. A sacred pause Carl Jung named the liminal space between ego's end and the self's dawn. Not failure, but chrysalis, a dissolving before rebirth. Here, motivation, once fed by masks and applause, fades, leaving only the raw essence of what's yet to take form. This isn't the end. It's the soul's quiet beginning. This moment, Jung taught, is no accident. It's the psyche's sacred descent, where the ego, stripped of its scripts, flounders in the face of truth. The ambitions that once lit your path, success, validation, the chase for more, dissolve like mirages under the weight of awakening's light. You don't lose your fire, you outgrow its fuel. The silence that follows isn't barren but pregnant with possibility, a holy stillness where the soul retreats to rewrite its story. Jung called this individuation the lifelong forging of the true self, not the one that performs for the world, but the one that resonates with the eternal. Yet our world fears this pause, misnames it stagnation, urges you to flee it with action or numb it with distraction. Jung saw it differently. This is initiation, the alchemical blackening where the old self dies to birth the new. The emptiness you feel isn't loss but a clearing, a space where the soul's pulse, faint at first, begins to hum. Not the clamor of ego's need to prove, but the quiet call to simply be, to move from inner truth, not external reward. For those who've walked this path, the stillness can feel like betrayal. You expected awakening to ignite you, to crown you with purpose, but instead, it strips you bare. Jung's wisdom cuts through. Enlightenment isn't found in visions of light, but in facing the dark, in making the unconscious conscious. This unraveling is no poetic flourish. It's a psychological death, a dismantling of the false self that once defined your every step. The goals, timelines, and roles that shaped your days fade, not because you failed, but because they belonged to a self no longer yours. The ego doesn't vanish. It wanders, lost without its map, while the self, still forming, waits in the wings. This in-between, this negrado, is where transformation brews, unseen by a culture that worships progress and scorns pause. Yet Jung insisted this is sacred terrain, where the soul, refusing the inauthentic, begins to sculpt a life aligned with its truth. The paradox deepens for the sensitive, the empaths, those who feel the world's pulse as their own. Awakening doesn't just shift their perspective, it reconfigures their inner architecture. The drive to achieve, to be seen, to fit the world's mold, collapses, leaving a void that feels both terrifying and holy. Jung's voice echoes here. This is not regression, not a step backward, but a step toward wholeness. The silence isn't empty, it's formative, a cocoon where the psyche dissolves the caterpillar of the past to birth the butterfly of the self. You may feel extinguished as one seeker shared, lying still, no longer caring to do or be. But this isn't the end of your spark. It's the forging of a deeper flame, one that burns not for applause, but for truth. This introduction isn't about despair. It's about the moment when old fuel burns out and a new source, still unseen, begins to kindle. Jung believed the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not the mask you wore, but the soul beneath. The loss of motivation you feel isn't defeat. It's the dawn of living authentically. As you stand in this quiet, know you're not alone. The stillness, though haunting, is the psyche's way of clearing space for what's true. If this stirs you, if it mirrors your own silent wandering, let your voice join others. Your story, however raw, may light another's path. Trust this void. It's not the end of your awakening, but the sacred beginning of your becoming. This is the moment where the shift begins to take root, where the stillness you've been sitting in starts to hum with a new kind of energy. It's not the frantic drive of the past, not the restless need to prove or achieve, but something softer, more grounded, a quiet stirring that feels like a call from within. Carl Jung spoke of this as the emergence of the self, the deeper center of your being that doesn't clamor for attention, but simply knows. Unlike the ego, which thrives on external validation, the self moves from a place of inner truth. It doesn't push you to perform, it invites you to be. And in that invitation, you begin to notice a change. The things that once lit a fire under you, deadlines, accolades, the need to be seen, now feel distant, like echoes from a life that no longer fits. Instead, you find yourself drawn to what feels real, what resonates with the person you're becoming. Maybe it's the way the morning light filters through your window, urging you to sit in quiet wonder rather than rush into the day. Maybe it's a sudden impulse to create, writing, painting, or simply tending to a garden. Not for praise, but because it feels like an extension of your soul. This is the self's way of speaking, not through grand gestures, but through the subtle language of presence. Jung called this living symbolically, a way of being where life becomes a conversation with the unseen. You start to notice the signs, the dreams that linger when you wake, the synchronicities that seem to whisper you're on the right path, the gut feelings that guide you when logic alone isn't enough. It's a different kind of motivation, one that doesn't roar but hums, steady and unshaken by the storms of the world. And yet, this shift isn't always easy. There are days when the old patterns creep back, when the ego whispers doubts. You're not doing enough. You're falling behind. But now you see those whispers for what they are, remnants of a self that no longer leads you. The self doesn't measure worth by productivity or applause. It asks a simpler question. Does this feel true? And when you move from that place of truth, something remarkable happens. The exhaustion of performing fades, replaced by a quiet energy that sustains you. You might still feel tired. Life doesn't spare its challenges, but it's no longer the bone-deep weariness of living out of alignment. Instead, you find a rhythm that feels like home. You say no to what drains you, even when the world expects a yes. You say yes to what lights you up, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. This isn't laziness as the world might label it. It's devotion. Devotion to your own becoming, to the truth that only you can feel. Jung believed this was the heart of individuation, not to become what the world admires, but to become what your soul knows you are. And as you lean into this new way of being, you begin to see that the stillness you once feared was never empty. It was a womb, a sacred space where the old could dissolve and the new could be born. And so you find yourself in this strange, uncharted space, a place where the old rules no longer apply, but the new ones haven't yet revealed themselves. It's a quiet, almost eerie stillness, like standing in the eye of a storm while the world spins chaotically around you. The ambitions that once fueled your days, those carefully crafted goals, the 5-year plans, the hunger for recognition, now feel hollow, as if they belonged to someone you no longer recognize. You're not lazy, though the world might label you as such. You're not lost, though you might feel adrift. This, Carl Jung would say, is the sacred in-between, a liminal space where the ego has been dismantled, but the self has yet to fully rise. He called this phase the Nekia, a descent into the underworld of the psyche, a necessary darkness before the dawn of true becoming. It doesn't look like progress, not by any modern standard. It looks like sitting quietly while others rush past, like staring out a window for hours, unable to explain the heaviness in your chest or the strange peace that accompanies it. But this isn't failure, it's transformation. The psyche is doing its deep alchemical work, dissolving the false structures you once clung to, making space for something truer to emerge. Jung understood that this phase, though unsettling, is holy. It's the chrysalis moment, where the caterpillar has turned to goo, no longer what it was, but not yet what it will be. And in this formlessness, the unconscious begins to stir. The parts of you that you've buried, your grief, your unspoken dreams, your quiet longings, start to surface, not as enemies, but as messengers. The ego, disoriented by the loss of its old script, might panic. It wants clarity, action, a plan. It wants to do something, anything, to escape the discomfort of this void. But the self, that deeper center Jung spoke of, whispers a different message. Stay, witness, let go. This is where the real work happens, not in striving, but in surrendering, not in forcing answers, but in sitting with the questions. You're not malfunctioning. Your soul is recalibrating. It's shedding the layers of performance, the masks you wore to fit in, the desires that were never truly yours. And as those layers fall away, you might feel raw, exposed, even afraid. But you might also feel a strange relief, a lightness that comes from no longer carrying what was never meant for you. Jung warned that society often misjudges this phase, calling it apathy or regression, because it doesn't understand a transformation that doesn't look like hustle. But what you're experiencing is not a step backward. It's a descent into truth. The soul is refusing to play the old games, to chase the old prizes. It's asking you to wait, to listen, to feel for the quiet pulse of what comes next. And if you can stay here, if you can resist the urge to fill the silence with noise, you'll begin to sense it, a faint stirring, a whisper of something new, something that doesn't demand but invites. When you experience a spiritual awakening, the world you once knew shifts. The illusions of identity, ambition, and societal roles dissolve, leaving a profound silence. At first, this stillness feels sacred, like stepping into fresh air after escaping a fire. But soon, the meaning that once fueled your drive fades, not dramatically, but quietly, as if your soul dimmed life's lights. You stop chasing goals, not from despair, but from a deep, peaceful exhaustion. A question emerges: why does truth bring emptiness? This paradox, rarely discussed, challenges the notion that awakening ignites purpose. For many, especially empaths and seekers, it empties you, stripping false motives until desire itself feels foreign. This isn't apathy, but a sacred void, a stage Jung described as the threshold between ego's collapse and the self's birth. the sacred descent into stillness. Carl Jung, the architect of analytical psychology, understood this disorienting phase as a pivotal moment in individuation, the journey to become your true self. Awakening dismantles the ego's scaffolding, built on external validation and achievement. The goals that once propelled you, career milestones, social approval, lose their pull as you see through the performance of the persona, the mask worn to meet the world's expectations. This creates a spiritual limbo, what Jung called the negrado in alchemy, where the false self dissolves before the true self emerges. Modern culture fears this pause, labeling it laziness or regression. But Jung saw it as initiation, a holy descent where the soul rejects inauthentic pursuits to forge a deeper truth. This void feels unsettling because the ego, stripped of its script, craves action, while the self demands patience. The ambitions that once burned brightly, tied to a constructed identity, now feel hollow. You haven't lost direction. You've outgrown the fuel that powered it. Jung's concept of individuation frames this as a shift from fragmentation to unity, where the psyche purges what's artificial. Careers built on insecurity, relationships rooted in roles or goals born of fear no longer resonate. This purification is both liberating and disorienting, leaving you in a gray space where old motives fade and new ones are yet to form. Jung cautioned against mistaking this for depression or escaping into spiritual bypassing, where you detach from life's messiness, calling everything an illusion. The self doesn't seek withdrawal. It yearns to embody truth in the world. This phase, though unglamorous, is formative. The unconscious rises, bringing buried grief, rage, or unmet needs to the surface. Shadow work, integrating these rejected parts, isn't optional. It's the foundation of wholeness. The ego resists, demanding clarity, but the self whispers for surrender, metabolizing years of illusion and false striving. Slowly, a new impulse stirs, not the ego's anxious push, but a quiet, soul-led hum. Jung called this the symbolic life, where you move not from fear, but from alignment, guided by dreams, instincts, and synchronicities. You create, teach, or serve, not to prove, but to express what's true. This motivation, born of presence, is sustainable. Unlike the depleting hustle of the past, it's not about chasing success, but embodying wholeness. Fatigue and doubt may linger, but the ache of self-betrayal fades. You choose peace over performance, following wonder rather than checklists. Jung's concept of enantiodromia, the transformation of extremes into their opposites, explains this shift. The ego's manic striving swings to the soul's stillness, not as failure, but as balance. This is the Hermit archetype, the withdrawal before rebirth, the chrysalis where the psyche transforms in darkness. Modern spirituality often glamorizes awakening, ignoring its crucifixion. But Jung insisted transformation begins in the shadow, not in bypassing pain for bliss. As the self emerges, life becomes a dialogue with the unseen, guided by questions like, what calls me? What feels true? Ambition becomes devotion to what's real. What brings you alive? Your spark hasn't vanished. It's evolving into a steadier flame, one that endures life's storms. Jung promised depth, not ease, in this journey. If you're in this sacred pause, you're not broken, you're becoming. Share your story, as it may light another's path. The truest connection is with your inner truth, the foundation from which all else grows. Until that truth fully forms, trust the stillness. It's not the end of your awakening. It's the beginning of your soul's unfolding. You've traversed the silent expanse of awakening's aftermath, where the old flames of ambition flickered out, and the world's relentless noise softened into a sacred hush. You've dwelt in this stillness, not as a captive of inertia, but as a wanderer in a holy pause, where no voice bellowed commands and no light blazed a clear path forward. Now, from the depths of this inner twilight, something ancient begins to stir. Not a roaring mandate, not a lightning bolt of certainty, but a gentle, persistent pulse, a whisper of the true self that doesn't urge you to reclaim the past, but beckons you to craft what has yet to take form. This is the first murmur of the self, not in the language of words, but in the quiet language of feeling, a subtle pull toward presence over performance, a call to live from the soul's deep well. Carl Jung named this the symbolic life, a way of being no longer tethered to the ego's scripts or the world's applause, but guided by the unseen currents of the psyche, where meaning unfolds not in striving, but in surrender to what is true. This shift, Jung taught, is the heart of individuation, the lifelong pilgrimage to become who you truly are, not the mask you wore to please the world, but the soul that resonates with the eternal. In this symbolic life, you don't chase the frenetic pace of hustle. You respond to the quiet rhythm of alignment. The fear of missing out, once a relentless driver, dissolves into the steady conviction of inner truth. Clarity ceases to be a prize to be won. It arrives unbidden, often cloaked in the simplicity of a moment, a fleeting intuition, a dream's whisper, a synchronicity that feels like the universe winking. Jung's wisdom illuminates this. Living from the self doesn't erase the human textures of fatigue, doubt, or grief. These threads still weave through your days as they must, for they are the raw material of existence. But what fades is the dull, persistent ache of self-betrayal, the exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that no longer fits the contours of your soul. In this new way of being, you find yourself creating, not for the world's applause, but because the act itself sings of truth. You say no when yes is expected, not out of defiance, but because honoring your inner compass feels like breathing. You follow the trail of wonder, not the rigid checkboxes of a plan crafted by fear. This isn't stagnation. It's a new kind of fuel, not the jagged rush of adrenaline, but the steady hum of alignment, not the whip of external pressure, but the gentle nudge of presence. Jung's symbolic life is a return to the psyche's native tongue, dreams that speak in riddles, instincts that tug like tides, synchronicities that weave meaning into the mundane. Your life becomes a dialogue with the unseen, not a monologue shouted into an indifferent void. You listen, and the world answers, not with fanfare, but with quiet signs that you are exactly where you need to be. The questions you ask transform. No longer, what must I do to prove my worth, but what calls softly to my soul? Not, what's the plan to secure my place, but where is life gently nudging me? Not, how do I measure up, but what feels true in the marrow of my being? You stop wrestling life into submission and begin to dance with its flow, trusting its rhythms even when they lead through shadow. Ambition doesn't vanish. It transmutes into devotion, a fierce yet tender commitment to what is real, what sets your spirit alight. This devotion, Jung believed, is the alchemy of the self. It moves mountains, not by draining your essence, but by channeling your wholeness. It creates, teaches, heals, serves, not because you must, but because your entire being hums with a quiet, unshakable yes. The spark you feared lost hasn't been extinguished. The old fire burned away to make space for a deeper flame, one that doesn't flicker in the storms of the world. Jung never promised a life of ease, but he offered something far richer. Depth, the kind that roots you in the truth of who you are. If you're standing in this sacred pause, know that you're not broken. You're becoming. You're not at the end of your awakening. but at the dawn of your soul's unfolding, where every step is an act of remembering the self that was always there, waiting beneath the masks. This is the privilege of a lifetime, as Jung said, to live not as a performance, but as a soul, aligned with the greater whole. If these words stir even a flicker in your heart, if they echo the quiet contours of your own journey through the void, I invite you to let your voice be heard. Have you felt the presence of that inner home, the self that knows you better than any mirror? Or are you still walking the sacred winding path back to yourself, one uncertain step at a time? Your story, however raw or unfinished, may be the lantern that lights another's darkness, the sign they didn't know they were searching for. Your words, shared in the comments below, could become a beacon for someone lost in their own silent awakening, a reminder that they are not alone. And if someone close to your heart is struggling, caught in the illusion that love must wound, that self-abandonment is the cost of connection, or that peace is a prize they'll never claim, share this message with them. Help them remember, true love doesn't demand you shrink. Real connection doesn't ask you to sacrifice your soul. The most vital union you'll ever forge is the one with your own inner truth, the foundation from which all else grows. I invite you to join this journey, to subscribe and activate the notification bell, for this is a space where we dive beneath the surface of things. Here, we explore the hidden architecture of the psyche, the soft whispers of the unconscious, and the mirrors of our relationships, each reflecting the evolution of our soul. If a question burns within you, if a theme or wound calls for exploration, leave it in the comments. This space is alive because of you, your presence, your voice, your courage to show up, not just to these words, but to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. Your contribution isn't merely welcome, it's essential to the tapestry we weave together. Thank you for being here, for bringing your heart to this moment, for choosing to walk the path of becoming, even when it leads through shadow and silence. And always hold this close. When the right moment arrives, whether it's a person, a purpose, or a truth, your soul will know it, not through the tremor of fear, but through the quiet expanse of peace. Until that moment dawns, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That bond is the root, the home, the sacred ground from which all that is real takes flight. From that wholeness, every truth blossoms, every purpose finds its way. Until we meet again on this winding path, I'll see you in the unfolding, where the soul's quiet becoming lights the way forward.